Welcome to Leadership Bites with myself, your host, Guy Bloom. This is a leadership podcast where I have conversations with colleagues, I chat with guests, and sometimes there'll be just me talking. You can connect with me at livingbrave.com, and when you enjoy the episode, subscribe and please tell everyone. Some of this. It's outstanding. So, James, it is fantastic to have you on this episode of Leadership Bites. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It is fantastic to be here. I appreciate the invite. Appreciate the time, and I'm looking forward to chewing the fat over the next however long.
Well, I start all of these off with, I don't do introductions per se. I think let the person speak for themselves. So I clearly know who you are. James, it would be great just to get that sense of who the heck is James. So I'm going to let you just introduce yourself, and then we'll jump off from there.
Crikey, yeah, and we were chatting just beforehand. I will try not to go on a 5-minute tirade about myself. I think, first and foremost, husband, father. That's the important stuff. Let's face it. Father to a 16-month-old young lad called Freddie, who's just obsessed with tractors. A beautiful wife, Krista. But in terms of what I don't know what I'm known for, what I'd like to be known for, I've been sober for the last 9 years, and during that time have set myself or embarked on a series of reasonably arduous endurance challenges, and the result of that is building what I call mental fitness, and the final outcome is a book. So also author. And what I'm trying to get across is how other people can learn from my mistakes and what I've picked up along the way, and build, as I say, what I call mental fitness to resilience to life's ups and downs, which we constantly find ourselves challenged with.
So it's always a simple sentence, but there's quite a lot there. So if we're talking about mental fitness, we're talking about a book, Ready, Set, Life, if I've got that correct. And that's speaking. I think to hear you talk about that, I think it'd be great just to get initially a sense of your journey, because I'm really a believer, if I'm going to listen to somebody talk about what might be relevant right now, it helps to understand where they've come from. So however far back you want to go, but I think it is worth just getting a sense of that, in essence, this is my journey, born up on the top of a Scottish mountain with no water. I had to fight wolves, and then it doesn't matter what it is, but let's get a sense of your journey.
Not quite that. Excuse me. Not quite the Scottish mountain, but I think the best place to go back to is 2013. I was playing semi-professional rugby at the time, and with that came a sense of identity, a purpose, if you like, in life. It gave me something that I centered most of my life around. Certainly it was by no means top flight, but of a decent enough level that I was eating all the right things, doing all the right training, lifting all the right weights, taking the supplements, eating the chicken, protein, and all that, such that at 3:00 on a Saturday afternoon, I was the best possible rugby player that I could be, and most of my life was centered around that. That all came tumbling down, I suppose, on the 9th of February 2013, when I broke my neck in a tackle gone wrong. And I was hospitalised, sellotaped to a hospital bed for a week while they assessed whether or not to slice my throat open and insert a titanium cage in there. Fortunately, I managed to avoid becoming part Arnold Schwarzenegger in the Terminator. But it took away that identity that I talked about in a moment. It took away who I was, and I no longer felt like I belonged to the team. I no longer felt I had that purpose, no longer wanted to hang out with my friends. And I think I'm 6'5", I was 17 stone at the time. That identity might not be necessarily a healthy identity, but the identity that came with that was one of an alpha male, and there's lots of talk about toxic masculinity these days, and I think that's probably a completely separate conversation. But I was always the big drinker, and it was the life and soul of the party, and loud and brash, and all this stuff. But that behaviour was, in inverted commas, acceptable when you're with your mates, with your rugby, teammates after a match on a Saturday evening, having a few pints. There's no harm in it. It became for me that sort of habitual enjoyment after a game became secretive. It became solitary, and I turned to alcohol as a means of filling the void, I suppose, that had been left by the loss of the game that I loved. Alcohol fueled depression, or depression fueled alcoholism. I'm not sure which. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not sure which is which. You'd have to go deep to work which can, sort of chicken and egg situation. But over a 3-year period, I spiraled into a fairly turbulent roller coaster of ups and downs, and upsetting loved ones, and breakups, and distancing myself from family and friends. And it all came to a head 3 years later, then, when I hit my what's called your rock bottom in these situations. Found myself, I woke up in a dingy hotel room with no idea how I'd got there, and an empty bottle of Jack Daniels next to me. I was on the floor, incidentally, so presumably so drunk that I hadn't even made it into the bed to pass out. And this epiphany, light bulb moment hit me, and I knew something had to change. So I sought various different routes for help: the AA program, hypnotherapy, counselling, all sorts of weird and wonderful things, literature, reading all about addiction, and found my way into sobriety through rediscovering my health and my fitness. And I signed up to a fitness challenge. It was the London Marathon. Set myself the challenge of running the London Marathon. Actually, it was, I don't know whether people believe in fate or not. Certainly my mum says, "Oh, James, things happen for a reason." Shortly after I got sober, I found myself one Sunday morning watching the London Marathon, and I was struggling with the initial stages of sobriety, and finding what the AA calls your higher power, which is something that you can pin your sobriety to, something that can be the foundation of your sobriety, something that's greater than yourself, family, friends, whatever it might be. It's individualistic to each person. But it hit me in that moment watching the London Marathon that rediscovering my health and my fitness was going to be the basis of my ongoing sobriety. And it was signing up to the London Marathon. The next day, signed up to the following year's event through a charity that I'd previously done some work with. Set myself the challenge of running the London Marathon, running the whole way in under 4 hours. And after a regimented training program, which gave me back the discipline and routine and structure in my life that I'd lost, I crossed the London Marathon finish line in 3 hours and 55 minutes. So just by the skin of my teeth, managed it, having run every step. And I always say there are two types of people that run a marathon. There's the first person who says, "That was bloody awful, never again." And the second who says, "Well, that wasn't so bad, maybe again." And then after a week of the muscle stiffness eases, you then start looking at your next challenge, and et cetera, et cetera. And my brain started doing funny things, and I was very much in that second camp. But my brain started saying, well, if you can run 26.2 miles, surely you can run 30, 40, 50. You get the picture. And I started signing up for a series of ultramarathons that just got longer and longer. 70 miles from Carlisle to Newcastle across the north of the country along Hadrian's Wall. Stunning route, which took me about 14 hours, I think. I progressed to 100-mile ultramarathons. I did one along the Thames from London to Oxford, 20 or so hours. And then shortly after getting married, thanks to my very accommodating wife, I ran from London to Bristol, which was 145 miles. It took me about 31 hours, I think it was. So that's sort of me, where I am, where I have got to, and that's over the course of, as I say, just over 9 years now. I've been trying to push myself, trying to constantly improve, I suppose, is a theme. That doesn't necessarily have to be in terms of distance run. It's just, constantly improve as a human being. And I now channel my learnings and my sobriety. That higher power has transferred from being my health and my fitness, although I still stay very fit and very healthy. That's been transferred to my wife and my son. I'm now sober for them. That's enough of a higher power for me. Thank you very much. So my son will never see me drunk, and that just makes me feel all warm and fuzzy inside. So it's about it, as I say, the learnings that have come with that I hope to give to other people if I can. I hope to, I say, through my book, and I also do motivational speaking, impart some small part of wisdomness in terms of how anyone can employ mindfulness to build what I call mental fitness.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I think it's easy to it's easy to ask that kind of question and then to have somebody answer so fully. I think I really appreciate. I make notes as I go, and so because we don't talk beforehand to plan what we're going to talk about. So sometimes, I kind of I offer raw thinking rather than well thought through facts. But when you said the route to sobriety, you found that through fitness and through that kind of having a higher power and that focus. I was just thinking there that really a person being well, and whatever that might mean to the individual, what fit might look to one person might be different to another. It's really, to me, I just wellness is identity. It is a sense of who I am and what I'm about. And your identity, what is your identity? It's your purpose. That's who I'm trying to be, and there's a reason for that. And I just want to clarify that I heard that correctly, as you can't really be well within yourself, whatever that means in terms of your balance or your mental health or whatever it is, if you don't have a sense of identity about what your narrative is and who you are. And that's then your purpose, isn't it? I'm trying to, every day or every month, I'm trying to be more that, or to maintain that, because maybe you found that balance. And I'm just wondering if me hearing what you said and interpreting it in that way, and I play that back to you, is that what I heard correctly?
Yeah. Yes and no.
Or not is okay.
I think the identity. I think the identity piece is interesting one, and the sense of purpose. There's a lot of just out there in the world, in literature and podcasts such as this, and influencers and people having these conversations. There's a lot of pressure on people to, in inverted commas, find your purpose in life. And some people might have found it, but without knowing it. And as I say, there is nothing wrong with just being a great dad. That's my purpose in life now. I don't need to go and climb Everest or make £1 million or set up a charity, or all of that sounds fun and lovely, but just being a wonderful husband and great human being, father to my child, friend to my friends, son to my parents, just that's the gold in life. That's the important stuff. So there's nothing wrong with identifying is a word that's thrown around, isn't it, these days? But identifying as just a good person. That said, if you are desperate in life to become, I practice jiu-jitsu. So I'm a blue belt in jiu-jitsu. At some point in my life, I'd love to get my black belt, probably in 10, 15 years' time. So I have a goal, I suppose, is a different. It's probably about differentiating between goals and purpose. I think that's quite an important distinction to make. In terms of the how that sort of ties into mental fitness. The point that I perhaps wasn't clear about, or that I didn't explain properly, is that we each have our own sense of who we are, but my identity changed in that split second when I ran headfirst into someone on a rugby field. I was a rugby player at that time, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a Saturday, let's say, and at 4:01 I was no longer a rugby player. The trouble was that I was so wedded I was so intent, and it was my entire life. I was so that was who I was, and I knew nothing else. Whereas actually identity can be fluid. It can move from one moment to another. As you know, as I say, in this moment, I'm a guest on a podcast. That's who I am. And the next moment, when I pick up my son from nursery, I will be a father again. So I don't think we should be necessarily too intent on determining exactly who we are at all moments. I think there's something to be said for rather than saying I must be a father or a son or a jiu-jitsu practitioner or a podcast host. There's something to be said for just saying I'm just going to be. I'm just going to be, full stop, and enjoy and be happy and experience the moment and go out in nature and get off our phones, head up, look around, just be part, just experience what's going on around us and be part of life. So there's a fine line between saying I am X, Y, and Z, and finding who that is, and your as I say, your purpose and your goals, and actually just exploring the moment. And that mindfulness is something that I talk about in my book and in my motivational speaking.
I think there's something for some people, I think if your validity, if your ego, if your justification for who you are is linked to one thing, then, and it might be a beautiful thing, but actually if it's quite a finite thing, like your job, I meet a lot of people who their identity or the way that they value themselves is through the seniority that they hold or the rank that they've got or the amount of money that they're making. And that's a very fragile point of reference. So there might be something about actually that the broader the spectrum of things that make you what you are, it is being somebody's friend, it is being somebody's a parent, it is being a husband or a wife or whatever it is. Actually, there are some things that I wouldn't want to use the word safer, but actually the wider the spectrum of things that actually inform who you are, rather than just one very particular thing that is maybe quite fragile, like the job that you've got or the hobby that you have. I meet it. I've done martial arts all my life, and I'm always very interested in people who I meet who have identify as a black belt, and that's who they are. They learn a martial art, and I've noticed it where, you're only learning this so you can say you're a black belt, which is very different to actually learning it and you become one. Right. And I see that quite a lot. You've come on this course. When I used to do certain courses, I go, you haven't come here to learn. You've come here to get a certificate. Okay. Right. And their ego and their identity is like that. And it's like you get it on the mat. You're talking about Brazilian jiu-jitsu, I presume, when you say jiu-jitsu, right? And you can tell you can tell the ones, I'm sure, that kind of enjoy losing to get better, versus the ones that maybe don't like losing and try and win, because their identity is locked into I'm at that level. To be beaten by you if you're a lower level, that wouldn't sit well with me, versus the ones that are happy. God, this bugger's just beat me. How did he do it? And I think that you can tell the people that the position they're in, the role they've got, the title, that is defining them, versus the people that are on a path. And I like your idea of being, present. They're in the moment, recognizing, I'm in a boat sailing a sea, and actually, that doesn't, where I am right now doesn't define me. It's a point on the journey. And again, so maybe different vocabulary, but I can see that it's very dangerous to allow certain things to define what you are if they're quite fragile things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a few points from that I can sort of relay off. The first one is that boat analogy, and I love that. And there's nothing wrong with just saying, "Well, I'm floating in a boat. That's all I need right now in this moment. That's all I need." Because if that's enjoyable and you're happy and you're deriving contentment from that, then all good, right? Coming back to the jiu-jitsu, the BJJ stuff, picking up on what you've just said, and it's a coincidence, but I had a conversation with my coach this morning about it. I did a morning training session, and he's black belt, and he's phenomenal, and he bends me in half every time I roll with him, and he's like, I use the analogy in the book because there's a chapter about jiu-jitsu in which I interview him. Do you remember the scene in Terminator 2 where the liquid metal robot sort of merges through the prison bars? He's like that. It's rolling with my coach is like that. I don't know how he does what he does. It's amazing, but he's been doing it for 15, 16 years, so it's understandable. But he said to me, because we were having a conversation about hobbies and contentment and all this stuff, he said, jiu-jitsu is my life. I love it, but I need to find a hobby. And maybe he's 37, 38, something like that. And he said, maybe I need to take up photography or something like that, like a midlife crisis hobby, or like woodwork or something like that. So it's interesting that he does something that he hasn't been able to do, make a career out of doing something that he absolutely loves. But still, he doesn't want to define himself as purely a jiu-jitsu practitioner or a jiu-jitsu coach. He's looking to become a photographer or a woodworksman or carpenter or whatever. Woodworksman is a word I've just
whatever
made
a
up.
woodworksman is.
And then interesting. Well, woodworksman is works. Interestingly, also the sort of the why of why do you do a hobby or why do you pursue your purpose or your goal is interesting. Because another chapter I'll keep referring back to the book. What's Ready Set Life? You were correct when you mentioned that earlier. Another chapter in another chapter, I speak to a guy called Ollie Phillips, who's a former England rugby sevens captain, phenomenal guy, one of these annoying people that's achieved more before the age of 40 than most do in several lifetimes, has sailed around the world, been to the North Pole, was World Sevens Player of the Year in 2009, I think it was. But I played rugby with him at university and we've stayed in touch. And I interview him. Sorry, the premise of the book is it's sort of my journey, but along the way, I speak to various interesting people that I've encountered in my life. My jiu-jitsu coach and Ollie, and there's a former SAS soldier and a recovering heroin addict, world record holding polar explorer. Anyway, Ollie is interviewed, and when I got in touch with him and said, "Look, I'm writing this book. I'd really appreciate your thoughts on how you became so good at what you did, retired, what you do, what you did. How do you achieve peak performance? If I want my son to play rugby for England, what does he have to go and do?" And the conversation was absolute. It was a beautiful conversation because Ollie opened up to me and said, "Look, my entire career was based on seeking validation from my father. I didn't do it for me. I did it because I thought it would win his approval." His father was a very sort of standoffish, probably cold, probably too strong a word, but not very effusive with his praise. And when Ollie got his first cap for England, his dad's response was, "Well, that's all well and good, but when are you going to go out and get a real job?" And his lots of therapy, actually, later, he admitted, he realised that his entire career was based on trying to get, firstly, praise from his father, and then when he didn't get that, it was based on getting praise from the adoring fans who were screaming his name at Twickenham and around the world. So the why you're seeking whatever you're seeking is important, and it has to be for you. If you're trying to seek it for someone else, that's not a purpose. That's not a goal. That's not going to make you happy, and you're constantly going to be looking for more. So again, that difference between purpose and goals, but also differentiating why you're doing it and who you're doing it for is crucial. Because if you're not doing it for yourself, and you are not going to derive happiness from it, and it's never going to be enough.
And I think that's quite interesting. I have quite a lot of tattoos, and somebody once said at the start of my tattooing journey, he said, just one thing, Guy, just make sure that you're getting them for you and not for other people. Because if you're getting them for other people, you're going to regret it one day. You might be happy with it now because you like people going, ooh, look at your tattoos. But there'll come a point where you'll wish you hadn't got them. So be damn sure they're for you. And I think a career can be like that, or the focus of your life can be like, I work with execs who sometimes, if not infrequently, I get that. I spent quite a lot of time getting here, Guy. And now that I'm here, I'm not necessarily sure this is the place I want to be. Because, of course, they were doing it for a whole host of reasons that weren't for themselves. So I think there is something about the external purpose. It might feel very motivational. It might drive you into certain places. It might take you to the top of a tree. But don't confuse that with contentment, and don't confuse that with the fact that actually it's not so much. You know, I think a lot of people they think and it's always a caveat to me when they're waiting to get happy. And I think when you're waiting to get happy, that means you're not enjoying the journey. And if you're not enjoying the journey, it's probably not your journey. It's probably somebody else's.
Yeah,
but you're fixated on the destination, but it could take you 20 years to get there. So, you know, that's 20 years of your life gone trying to get to a destination.
That old saying that it's about the journey rather than the destination, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's
you can lead a life that's not your own. Yeah, I totally hear that.
If you're constantly aiming to be happy in the future, that just says to me that you're not happy now. And that's a very simple way of looking at it. But I love that phrase. Excuse me. I love that phrase that it's about the journey, not the destination. It's how you get there. And that sort of constantly, the trouble is we are constantly bound by society's expectations and laws or rules or whatever you want to call them, in that you graduate, you go and get a job, and then you've got to get a better job, and then you've got to buy a car, and then you've got to buy a faster car, and then you've got to buy a house, and then a bigger house, and then I've got kids now, and I've got to put them through nursery, and that's the same as it costs the same as the mortgage, like each month. It's just ludicrous how much nursery fees are, believe me.
I believe it.
Excuse me, I've got something in my throat. But yeah, so that again, it's all very well. If you want to drive a Land Rover, brilliant. Is it because you want to drive a Land Rover, or is it because you think everyone else is going to think that you look cool in your Land Rover? Yeah. Is it going to bring you happiness? The answer is probably no, because material possessions rarely do. And even if they do, all right, so you buy a Discovery Sport, and that's fantastic, and it's got 300 horsepower, and it does this, that, and the other in 100 miles in 6 seconds or whatever it is. But then, well, actually, the Range Rover equivalent has got 400 horsepower. So where does it stop? I drive a Land Rover, a Discovery Sport. I'm very happy with it. This is the point.
Yes, so this metaphor may not be.
I don't know whether this is relevant to the common man or not. But listen, it's if you are seeking happiness, then by definition you are not happy, and that comes back to my point a moment ago about just recognizing, just being, recognizing the moment. You mentioned the yacht. Okay, I'm on a yacht, and it's wonderful, and I'm happy right now. Very few people, I think, or too few people experience that, because it's always about the next thing. What's next? Okay, I've ticked off that thing. Well, I've got the next objective, or the next goal, or the next milestone, or the next deadline. Or well, let's just sit back for a minute. Again, the journey. You imagine you're climbing a mountain. You get halfway there, rather than sort of looking upwards and staring at the summit and thinking, well, I've still got halfway to go. Turn around, look back, and think, God, look how far I've come. I'm already halfway there. And there's an amazing lesson to be learned here in terms of how we can reframe and just reframe things and use simple language. And it's something that I very much employed when I gave up drinking. I told myself, and this was after a bit of research and speaking to people, I told myself, rather than I have to give up drinking, I told myself I get to give up drinking. And just the simplest little choice of vocabulary turns the entire thing from a very negative thing, I'm losing something, to a very positive, well, I'm gaining something. I'm gaining back my Saturday mornings. I'm gaining back my, I sort of talked about my health and my fitness. There's so many examples of how we can do that in our day-to-day lives, just by changing vocabulary and taking a positive approach to things, rather than we are inherently negative, and that's 2.5 million years of evolution that you can go into for that story. Simple things like that is part of what I talk about when I talk about it. Talk about this stuff.
And I like that, because I talk about accountability and ownership. And there is something here about I get to is also then it's about control. It's a choice. I respond very, very badly to command. If you order me to do something, even if it's good for me, I can push back against that for whatever deep psychological reasons that might be. But I think quite a few people who are actually quite strong personalities who end up in a position of weakness, i.e. through an addiction or a bad decision or whatever it is, actually being faced with demand actually creates a reaction. So even when I know, for example, I've got to do something for my own health, I looked at myself in the mirror a few months ago and I was a stone overweight. I was getting that little 55-year-old pot belly and little fat face, and I went, all right. Now, I've got to lose weight doesn't make me lose weight. Me saying, right, come on, lose weight, it doesn't make me lose weight. Why? Because I actually react to myself trying to tell me what to do. It's weird. But if I frame it through that lens of it's a choice, this is about you making decisions for you. Now, we've all got different ways. Maybe actually some people, they actually need to hear their inner voice go, no, do it, you bugger. So actually it's not that is always the way. But I think you're right. You have to find the language, the frame, the vocabulary. And if the vocabulary that you're hearing isn't working for you, then actually that ability to find new vocabulary, it may not be mine, and it may not be vocabulary that works for me. But if it works for you, because actually whatever you're doing, if it's not working, what's insanity? Continuing to do the same thing and expecting a different reaction. So I think you're right. I think it is finding something that shifts the narrative for your internal dialogue that allows you to be engaged by it, and probably doesn't require any justification from somebody else as to why you talk like that to yourself, but it makes me do it. And maybe that's the empowering thing I've found. Just like your fashion, I found the clothes that I feel comfortable in. I found the inner voice that I feel comfortable with. And I feel good when I wear these clothes, and I react well to myself when I talk to myself like this. Maybe that's some of that.
Yeah, there's a couple of sort of pick things out of that. Firstly, it shows good self-awareness on your part, knowing that you respond negatively to command, even if it's your own command. Just shows that you're aware of what's going on in your head, which is part and parcel of mental fitness, recognizing the emotions that we're experiencing and what we can do about them. That's what I talk about. So that simple I've got to that denotes a challenge, doesn't it? That denotes it's going to be a struggle. It denotes it's going to be hard, and that you're going to have to get off the sofa, and you're going to have to lace your shoes up, and you're going to have to go for a run, or whatever it might be. But change the O to an E, and you get to, and it's all suddenly positive, and it's all suddenly easy, and it's a joy, and actually I'm going to get something out of it. And the second element is I suppose it comes down to change, doesn't it? And we all fear change, and we're all scared. And again, I've mentioned evolution, 2.5 million years of it. we're scared of change because it could be dangerous, and it's an inherent survival instinct that the human species wants to avoid any sense of danger, because basically all we've been, when it comes down to the sort of evolutionary roots of it, all we've been put on this earth to do is to survive, procreate, move on, right? Keep the species going. So any sense of change, well, I've got to move out of the cave. Well, that means that I could come across a saber-toothed tiger on the way, or I could get eaten, or I could this, or I could get trodden on by a woolly mammoth, or whatever it might be. That's still in us. That's still in us 2.5 million years later. So the change comes down to identifying the various different steps that you're going to go through. And it's similar to the change curve, if anyone's ever seen that, the sort of steps that I would advise, in that you've got to identify the position that you're in and why you want to move out of that. So, Guy, in your case, you've said you wanted to lose a stone. Well, why do you want to lose a stone? Is it because you're going to feel better about yourself, or is it because you think other people will look at you? And again, it comes down to the who you're doing it for. But if you are identifying correctly that you are doing it for yourself, again, there's an element of why. Well, you've said you're going to look better in your clothes. You're going to not feel out of breath when you climb the stairs. You're going to be more attractive to the opposite species. You might be able to attract a partner. All these various different potential reasons why you might lose a stone. But that's not enough. That's the sort of the inspiration, if you like. Doing that alone is not enough. You've then got to identify where you're getting to. The second stage of the change process is, well, I'm here at the moment, but I need to get to there. And so that's the sort of the motivation element of it. You've got the inspiration and the motivation. And without the two, one doesn't work without the other. Because if you can't visualize yourself a stone lighter, healthier, more able to climb the stairs, you're not going to get there. One day you're going to think, well, I'm going to lace my trainers up, and then you're going to think, well, actually, do you know what? I can't be bothered today. And you're going to lose the routine or the structure that you've put in place. So you've got to start having conversations with other people who are healthy. You've got to join running clubs. You've got to imagine yourself in that position. You've got to try going out for a 1K, say you're going couch to 5K, for example. You've got to go for a 1K run to get an idea of what it feels like. And okay, you get hot and sweaty and you're out of breath, but then you get the endorphins afterwards and you think, okay, that feels good. I can see why I'm doing this. And I can see where I'm going towards. And so that two-step process, as I say, they don't work independently of each other. The one doesn't work without the other. And change is actually, having said all that, it's actually a 3-step process, because along that timeline of between step 1 and 2, the inspiration and the motivation, you've got all the hurdles and the barriers and the resistance that are going to come at you as along the way. So, okay, so what's the resistance to going from a couch to 5K? Well, I don't own a pair of running shoes. The weather's bad. I've got too much work on. I've got to pick the kids up. All of these things, they're going to get in the way. And any excuse comes back to the survival bit. Any excuse to not go for a run, you're going to go, well, I haven't got time today. Oh, well, never mind. I'll have to go tomorrow. But guess what happens tomorrow? As Chief Vital Statistics says in Asterix, the comic book, tomorrow never comes. He's worried that the sky's going to fall on his head, but tomorrow never comes. If anyone's read the Asterix books, there's a bizarre tangent of a reference for you. Anyway, back to the barriers.
If you haven't read Asterix and Obelix, then if you haven't read Asterix and Obelix, then you can't be friends of ours. It's that simple.
No, you're no friend of mine has not read the absolutely. I've read the Asterix books. So yeah, again, just summarising, you've got the inspiration where you're coming from, you've got the motivation where you're going to, and along the way you've got a whole load of hurdles, and you need to be damn sure that you know what those hurdles are going to be, because when they come along, you need to be able to get over them. You need to say, right, look, the kids are playing up, but I'm sorry, wife, or whoever it might be, you need to give me 20 minutes because I need to go and do my exercise because this is important to me. And it's that 3-step process that allows us change, in short.
So when you wrote your book, I know I wrote a book, and it was quite an element of catharsis, an element of it allowed me to get the spaghetti in my head into a coherent order that it didn't just make sense to me, it made sense to others. So when you went through that process, what was your kind of, if I want people to read this book because, so if I'm listening to you talking now and I think, right, I like hearing James talk, Ready, Set, Life, I can follow the link that I'm going to put with the podcast, or I can go on Amazon and quickly find it. Who do you want to read it? Or what's that? Yeah, if somebody's listening to this, if you read this, this is why I think somebody would want to read and would get great value from reading that book. What would that be?
So the reason that I want people to read it, or the reason that I think people should read it, is that I genuinely believe it can help you. And I say that with my hand on my heart, in terms of like the things that I have learned along the way have helped me. And I talked about mental fitness and wellness all being individualistic. So yes, I appreciate that. It's me. But as I mentioned a moment ago, the important part about the book is that it's not just me narcissistically rambling about my own life and learnings. It's getting thoughts and contributions from a whole myriad of really incredible, wonderful people who have seen and done some just remarkable things, and getting their take on how they have faced off against challenges, overcome hurdles, and built what I call mental fitness. So, I mean, the book, interestingly, it didn't, it's going to sound bizarre, but it didn't start life as a book. It started out as a sort of, as you said, bizarre mumble jumble of spaghetti in my head, and a few thoughts and a few, what ifs and maybe buts and this, that, and the other. And I suppose the premise, the idea started properly forming when my wife and I found out that she was pregnant. And the resulting emotions from that were several fold. For anyone that's got kids will know. Firstly, abject terror at the prospect of bringing life into the world and keeping it alive, but not just from the perspective of keeping a tiny human alive. More also from the point of view of bringing that life into the world as it is today. And let's face it, it's not in a good place, is it? There's wars, there's the climate crisis, there's identity crises, there's all sorts of things going on that Freddie will have to somehow navigate his way through. All sorts of things that we will hopefully, or somehow we'll have to make it up as we go along, help him navigate through, and we'll have to work out how we do that. As I say, sort of fly by the seat of our. There's no parenting handbook as to navigate everything that's going on in the world. So it was more a case of, well, how does what I've learned, how is it relevant? How will it be relevant to him, to my son? But the result of that is how is it relevant to everyone, to all people who are, whether you're going through a difficult patch in your life, or whether you're struggling to find your purpose, as we've just talked about, or make ends meet, or find a job, or buy a Land Rover, whatever it might be. The book is aimed at anyone who feels like they might be able to get more from life. If you're perfectly happy and content in life, fantastic, then there's elements in there for you as well. But it's I mean, I suppose it's a self-help book is the long and the short way of describing it. But as I say, it's come from a place of, well, I'm not sure how I'm going to help my son navigate through life, but this is what I've learned along the way, and hopefully that will be of help.
It's interesting, actually. I think I had a very similar motive when I wrote my book. I wanted Milo and Hugo to read it and go, okay, this is how Dad's brain worked. So I wanted a bit of legacy in there, maybe. But I also wanted it, to be, because I talk about trust, accountability, bravery, and connection. And it almost doesn't matter what's in the book. It's an indicator of where your head's at and what you found useful, and that's a powerful sort of value. Did you have anything that, as you were writing it or speaking to others, that, because I had a few, I don't know if I want to use the word epiphanies, but I think I had a few moments where I went, I know I think this, but I don't know if I'm actually doing it. And then it kind of made me refocus even more. And I wonder if in actually the writing, the creation of it, did it re-challenge? Did it reinforce? Because I know it did with me. Because my company's called Living Brave, and the book's called Living Brave Leadership. And then there were some moments where I thought, I don't think I'm living brave on that. And it's hilarious when you sort of apply your own methodology to yourself, and you find yourself wanting, which is probably that review and that self-reflection that's required. But I just wonder, were there any moments where actually you went, I'm writing this down, but I might need to put a bit more effort into something? When I wonder if it identified anything for yourself in the process.
Yeah, sure. I mean, absolutely. Although probably more accurate to say that I was doing the stuff, but I probably wasn't necessarily aware that I was doing it, or I wasn't being deliberate enough at doing it. So yes, definitely it reinforced some of the mechanisms and the learnings that I've employed over the years, but it actually helped me to write them down in order to properly recognize them. So that change process was definitely one of those situations. I've made changes, for example, giving up drinking. And at the time I thought, well, I have to stop drinking, but how do I then continue not drinking? And so there was that, it's obviously a continual journey, this, but I do feel like I have achieved sobriety, albeit I will continue to achieve sobriety. So I sort of see myself as a recovered alcoholic rather than a recovering alcoholic, if that makes any sense at all. But anyway,
yeah, totally.
That change process was one of the ones that I had to that gave me. I took quite a lot out of writing the book myself in terms of how I approach things. And yes, there were plenty of other processes. One is the sort of the daily mindfulness that I now practice. And this sounds people hear the word mindfulness, they associate it with meditation, and start sweating that they have to sit cross-legged and hum to an 8-legged elephant and light candles. And you don't. The premise of mental fitness is building resilience to life's ups and downs. It's being able to recognize all the good stuff in life and fully appreciate it, and recognize the bad stuff and cope with it. That's what mental fitness gives you the tools to do. And the way that I advise, the way I believe that we can all build mental fitness, a bit like it's exactly like building physical fitness, is you just do a little bit every day. Now, physical fitness is actually harder to build because you need to go out for a half-hour run every day. You need to lift weights. You need to get sweaty, all of this sort of stuff. And a lot of people don't get on board with that. And that's fine, each their own. I mean, I personally advocate for every single person on this planet should move on a regular basis in some way, shape or form. But if you don't want to run an ultramarathon, that's absolutely fine. Okay? I'm not going to insist that everyone goes out and run an ultramarathon. I am going to insist, however, that you believe that you could. There's an important distinction, and that's part of the thinking process that I help people with. And instead of that physical, sweaty, half an hour a day kind of stuff, mindfulness can be done in 3 minutes each day. You can do it while the kettle's boiling. Instead of looking at Instagram or the blight on society that is TikTok, you can just think to yourself, how, why, and what. How do I feel? Why do I feel it? And what can I do about it? And by doing that very simple exercise on a daily basis, you start recognizing the emotions that you feel, what causes those emotions, and how you can cope with those emotions, or if necessary, override them. Now, it could be last thing at night, it could be first thing in the morning, it could be while the kettle's boiling. But that gradual building of self-awareness is the recipe, if you like, for my recipe for mental fitness.
That's very positive. I think there's something there about habit, self-reflection, the willingness to be vulnerable, not making you vulnerable. You know, some people, you know, the habit of self-reflection isn't there for them. So actually just building habit, it's not about, as you say, 2 hours of meditation, but 3 minutes of reflection. You know, that's a thing. Having a little tool, a template. You know, yeah, you could do a deep dive maybe on and journal and do all sorts of things. But actually, if you just asked yourself those 3 quick questions, then actually, you know, there might be a more advanced version of it, but you're doing it. It's like fitness, isn't it? You know, if you just get your arse in gear and go for a walk around the block, you know, hey, it's better than anybody that's not. And the reality is you're creating the habit of exercise. Somebody talked to me about this thing called the habit of one, which I quite liked, which is this idea of, you know, if you're trying to do 1,000 press-ups, then actually that can be a bit overwhelming. But if every single morning you get up and do one, and you go, what's the point in doing one? Well, if you do one press-up up until the point where you cannot not do one, then you've created the habit of doing a press-up. Now you can do 2. Right? And I like that. Small steps can create the habit. Because for some people, they can't make the big. Yeah. Well, I like that idea. And I just think
it's breaking down an objective like 1,000 press-ups into, well, it's not 1,000 press-ups. It's one press-up 1,000 times.
Nice.
And it's something that I employed on my ultra marathons, and it's something that I learned from the special forces. Actually, I didn't mention earlier, but I was lucky enough to take part in SAS Who Dares Wins, that slightly silly show on Channel 4 where a load of civilians get beasted by former special forces operatives. I think you've interviewed Ollie Ollerton before, haven't you? So he was one of the directing staff, and the premise of that was just keep putting one foot in front of the other, no matter what. And if you do that, you will get to the finish line, whatever that finish line is, whether it's a deadline or whether it's the end of an ultra marathon. So I can vividly remember the first 100-mile ultra marathon that I did. It was after I'd been on SAS Who Dares Wins, because I'd run the 70-mile, the one I mentioned, from across the north of the country, and I'd got to the end of that, and I'd been thinking for a while that maybe 100 miles would be something to achieve sometime in the future. But having run 70 miles and like collapsed along the quayside and along the River Wear, over the Millennium Bridge, and then sort of flopped over the finish line, I was absolutely broken after 70 miles. And the thought of running another marathon and then some more on top of that just blew my mind. I was like, no, that's impossible. No one could do that, right? And this negativity set in. Oh, how am I ever going to do that? I then got to do SAS, and it was drilled into us, this military special forces mindset that actually if you think you're done, you're only 40% done, I think is the rule, the sort of 60-40 rule they've got. But it's just keep putting one foot in front of the other. And with a little bit of tweaking of fueling strategy and pacing and this, that and the other, and looking after my body and managing blisters and things like that, another 30 miles was actually perfectly manageable, in inverted commas. But I can remember setting off from, the first one I did was from London to Oxford along the Thames. And I can remember setting off from Richmond, got the Thames on the right-hand side of me, and I've got my sports watch on, and I clicked the thing, right, let's go, off we go. And about 6 minutes later, my watch buzzed, and it was set to kilometres. Oh, sorry, that's my Labrador. It was set to kilometres because kilometres go faster, so you feel like you're making more progress. That's my rationale for it. But it's about 6 minutes later, my watch buzzed, and it said, "You've done 1 kilometre." And I thought, again, it's a reframing thing. If I had thought to myself, "Oh, Jesus, I've only done 1 kilometre," I'd have spent the next 20 hours going, oh God, this is bloody awful. But it popped into my head. Actually, I chuckled to myself. And my thought was, oh, great, I've already done 1 kilometre. Only 160 to go, right? And it was such a simple process. And I spent the rest of that 20 hours just laughing to myself because of the ridiculousness of the situation. But it made it, all right, yeah, it was arduous and tough and da-da-da-da, but it was a really enjoyable experience, chatting to other runners and learning where they'd come from. And then at one point in the middle of the night, I thought I was hallucinating. I could see I had my head torch on, running through the fields out sort of Abingdon way on the approach into Oxford. And I could see these 2 lights sort of hovering in the distance. And I wasn't sure what I was seeing, and I wasn't running, and am I hallucinating? Have I not eaten enough? Have I not taken on enough salts? And then I thought, oh, shit, is it? Yes, bang. I ran into a cow in the middle of a field. The lights were the reflection of its eyes in the reflection of my head torch. And it was just the most stupid, utterly ridiculous situation, running into a cow. And this cow was obviously transfixed by this light coming towards it and didn't move off the path. And if you can laugh at stuff like this, a laugh at the ridiculous it's actually another theme in the book with an interview I do with a guy called Henry Cookson, who was a world record holding polar explorer. And he's been to the North Pole, he's been to the South Pole, and he talks about just the laughs that he had on his expeditions, even though they were unbelievably, you can imagine how brutal it is, kite skiing to the southern pole of inaccessibility. And it takes sort of 50 days or something like that. And you've got blisters everywhere and chafing and you just can't imagine how hideous that must be. But if you laugh at it, it becomes an amazing, enjoyable experience. Same with any challenge in life, I suppose. And it's an interesting pickup. Again, we talked about reframing earlier. I have already run 1 kilometre, only 160 to go. Yay, great. Okay. Off we go. So it's just amazing how the mind.
Yeah, and I think this is all part of this, that actually there is something here that one of the key things I'd notice in people who are high performers who are healthy. Because I think you can be a high performer in the context of achieving a great deal, and it may not be being healthy. But actually, somebody once said to me, these are what I call dinner party moments, Guy. And I was like, what does that mean? He says, well, think of the worst thing that's ever happened to you. Let's just say, hypothetically, you had a car accident and broke both your legs. At the time, it was pretty rubbish. And then, I don't know when it will be, 6 months later, 6 years later, you'll end up going, do you remember that time I crashed and broke both my blinking legs? There comes a point where it becomes a frame of reference that you laugh about. And I thought, and that was just this reframing. And actually, he said, so when times are tough, he says, I just think to myself, okay, dinner party moment. Because at some point I am going to laugh about this. Yeah. And he says, and what I recognize is if I'm really mindful, if I'm really present, I can enjoy the experience of recognizing that this is a dinner party moment that I'm presently aware of. I'm experiencing it like I'm alert to the fact that it's happening. He says, and that's when I can become an observer on it, and I can see the humour in it. And I thought, and which is really to what you're saying, it's that kind of that capacity to reframe, to give it is what it is, but my frame of reference on it is one that actually fuels me, be it through amusement or just recognizing I can see what this is in terms of it's part of my life's journey, it's part of my narrative. It doesn't matter what your own internal narrative is, but by being able to step out of it and see it as something else that's valuable, then actually, that's a power, I think. So I really recognize that. So listen, I'm super alert. Yeah, I'm super alert to time, James, and we're coming
awareness. Again, we talked about self-awareness and being able to recognize that a moment in your darkest, most troubling moments, and being able to recognize that actually in 6 months or 6 years, as you say, time, you're going to have a little bit of a chuckle about it that's lovely. And I suppose it comes down to awareness, but there's also an advice piece that I'd give people on this, and I reference this in the book in terms of recognizing who your support network is. Because if you know that you've got someone that you can tell that story to in the future, then that's going to make the process even easier. And I talk about building a support network for difficult situations, and having it's the example that comes to mind. Having a 16-month-old, it comes with its challenges, right? He's made a mess of his. I won't go into detail. He's made a mess of his nappy, or God, all the rest of it, or he's having a hissy fit tantrum about not being able to watch Tractor Ted, or all these stupid examples in terms of these aren't obviously major problems, but I've got a WhatsApp group of dads in the local village, and we sort of joke, oh, Freddie's done this, and oh, isn't that hilarious? And we go to the pub, and we 4 of us, 5 of us go for a couple of pints. I'm on my Guinness Zeros, and we laugh about how silly it is that what our little ones have done, and it's cathartic, and it makes things easier, and you have a laugh about it. I also talk about sharing problems in the book. It's that old adage, and I think it was originally a guy from General Motors who said, a problem shared is a problem halved, something along those lines was the phrase. It was originally an employee of General Motors, I found. But it's telling people, and if you've got an issue, if you've got a problem, tell someone. Mine was my drinking. I decided that I was going to stop drinking, and I recognised the fact that I was obviously going to have to tell everyone I knew about this, because they were all, big rugby drinking mates. And they were, the next time I saw them, they were going to say, "Oh, James, do you want a pint? Let's play drinking games or do shots or whatever it is." But if I told every single person I knew, that I then avoided that situation further down the line. And it's a silly example, but the example I use in the book is, if you've got a leaky tap, tell a plumber. Tell someone, whatever that problem might be. Tell someone, share it, make it, half the problem. Problem shared is a problem halved. But it's, again, recognizing who you can tell that problem to, and recognizing that support network, and building people around you that you are able, or you feel comfortable sharing that with. And anyone that you don't feel comfortable sharing that with, perhaps assess whether or not they fall into that friend bracket. I'm not saying you necessarily have to discard people from your life if you don't feel comfortable with telling them issues or problems that you're having, but perhaps question, well, why are they in my life if I don't feel like I can confide in them? Might sound a bit brutal, but we've got to be selective with who we spend our time with, because our time is important to us.
So, thank you, James. I kind of top out at about an hour, because I recognise that I can keep going with somebody like you. I could just let's grab a pizza.
It's a wonderful conversation. We could go for
I'll be here for another 4 hours. So I'm just super alert to people's kind of capacity to listen to a podcast. And as I'm not the Joe Rogan podcast, they're not going to sit here for 3 hours and listen as much as I think they can.
And I'm not Donald Trump.
But anyway. Bingo. Right. So listen, if people want to, there'll be the link in the information that goes with the podcast. But if people want to look you up, where do they go, James?
So it's all James Gwinnett, GWINNETT, Instagram, LinkedIn. I've also got a website, jamesgwinnett.com, which explains more about my sort of personal history and the work that I do in motivational speaking. And the book, as you mentioned, I've got a little copy there. Ready, Set, Life is available. Good, just stick Ready, Set, Life into Google. It should be the first result, or Amazon. Available in hardback, paperback, and Kindle formats. Yes.
Bingo. So listen, I would definitely suggest people go and read the book, Ready, Set, Life. I think it's going to be very valuable to people. I want to thank you personally for coming on, giving me some of your time. Sometimes conversations are a little bit painful. This was a great conversation. It was just easy to listen to you, and that means a lot. If it's easy to listen, then I think then you've probably got something that's worth listening to. So for me and everybody else that's listening, just thank you so much for being on this episode.
Pleasure. Thank you for those kind words and saying that I was nice to listen to. It's lovely to hear. But it's thank you to you, because it's your time and it's your expertise putting this together, and your recording equipment and all the rest of it. So it's thank you to you.
That's it. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Subscribe so you don't miss out. Please tell other people, help spread the word. Interested in working with me? Go to livingbrave.com, hop onto LinkedIn, Guy Bloom, and of course, even buy the book, Living Brave Leadership, at amazon.com. Take care.